Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would make this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting, or that I thought would be not only a little bit interesting to kind of talk about and a little entertaining, but that it would also finally give an opportunity for me to kind of do a little breakdown, at least in terms of the sweet science and also in terms of that of boxing ability. Now, of course, for those of you that have not heard the most recent news, Canelo Alvarez, he has signed apparently a four-fight deal with that of Riyadh season, with that of Turkey Al Sheet, and more than likely, sometime within May, he's going to be fighting possibly Jamal Charlo, or maybe the guy who recently just knocked out Jaime Munguia. I'm not really sure. Or, who knows? He also could potentially fight William Skull. I also heard of this one French African fighter that he could potentially fight in Billy, or whatever the hell his name is. Personally, I would actually be very interested in the Jamal Charlo fight, although I don't believe that Jamal Charlo is really the same fighter anymore, but it still would be a fight that I think many people would have an interest in, just because they had a little bit of history. But anyways, the reason why I wanted to do this video is because, a very long time ago, or not a very long time ago, but maybe about a few weeks ago to a month ago, within one of my videos, I don't remember, when the response was or for what video it was. When we were talking about the Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Bud Crawford fight allegedly being set up, one person stated that, honestly, I just don't see that much of a difference between that of a Canelo Alvarez and an Errol Spence Jr. They both come across to me as, pretty straightforward, front forward, or, pushing fighters or pressure fighters that pretty much only have one or two counters, and that's really about it. I just don't really see a difference other than that of the size. And I've already told people this. Canelo Alvarez, when you take a look at him, for certain people that may take a look at something on the surface and may take a look at him versus his fights against Billy Joe Saunders or Caleb Plant, and for people that don't really know the sweet science all that much. And when I say that, I'm not trying to insult anybody. It's just a lot of people, they don't really know what they're watching. A lot of people may take a look at Errol Spence Jr. and Canelo Alvarez like they're a similar fighter, but they're really not similar whatsoever. And the reason why, in my view, it's a very daunting task for Terrence Bud Crawford to face Canelo Alvarez is not just because of the size and also because of the pounds, but also because Canelo Alvarez is going to be the most intelligent, the most talented, and the most all-around skilled fighter that he's ever fought. And to be honest with you, I don't think that it's particularly close. I've always stated this, that Canelo Alvarez, in my view, that he's right there with anybody for his generation in terms of all-around skill set. Now, Canelo Alvarez, one thing that, in terms of his skill set, that is a little bit leaky or isn't quite as good as maybe some other people of his generation, is that of the feet. He does have a little bit of slow footwork and at times can be a little bit more flat-footed, although he has relatively, good to great foot positioning. But, Canelo Alvarez, other than that, every other category is pretty much A grade. The main weaknesses in Canelo Alvarez's style would mainly be that at times he doesn't really have an elite level gas tank, and his feet can be a little bit slow and at certain times flat-footed, a little bit too long. But other than that, Canelo Alvarez has great, advantages or great skills in a lot of other categories. And we're going to take a look at the difference between that of a Canelo Alvarez and an Errol Spence Jr. And the main thing that you're really going to take a look at between both Canelo Alvarez and Errol Spence Jr. is, first of all, the difference in head movement and changing levels. And on top of that, the multitude of ways that both of them can fight. Canelo Alvarez is a guy that, even though, of course, a certain amount of people only label him as a pressure fighter, Canelo Alvarez is an expert within that of the mid-range. Now, Errol Spence is a guy that has maybe one or two counters within the mid-range. You notice that sometimes he'll kind of step back, get in a little shell, kind of wait for his opponent to throw a certain punch, then he might throw a left hook over the top, or he might back up and try to run you into a left cross, straight down the pipe. But other than that, he really doesn't have much on the back foot. He's a guy that knows how to use his lead hand to a certain degree, but he's not someone with as elite of a lead hand or jab as a Canelo Alvarez. Nowhere near. It just is what it is. He is not someone that's, has an extraordinarily sharp jab, and he's also able to get countered over the top with the lead hand as well quite easily, because one thing you're going to notice about Errol Spence Jr. is that he does not change levels extraordinarily well, nor move his head off the center line or give you different looks very well. But we're going to be taking a look at this little highlight footage right here between himself and Kell Brook. This was probably the best performance, in my personal view, in Errol Spence Jr.'s career, when you just talk about how sharp he was and all-around skilled he was. And, of course, that kind of makes sense because, of course, this was the first title fight of his professional career. But anyways, we're going to take a look at this video. We're going to be looking at one boxing. I could be taking a look at longer highlights, but I don't really want each highlight video to take 40 minutes long because I am going to be doing a lot of explaining here. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what we're going to see with Mr. Errol Spence Jr. and then compare it with Canelo Alvarez in another fight. Now, the first thing that you see right there, immediately from Errol Spence Jr. and Kell Brook, and I want to rewind this. Once again, Errol Spence Jr., it's very easy to counter him over the top, at least with a great jab, because he's not a guy that moves his head out of the range extraordinarily well. He's not a guy that really gives you different looks with his head movement, at least to a great degree. And on top of that, he usually will keep it very high and centered, and he's a guy that if he doesn't keep it high and centered, it's going to be at the same tilt. So you're going to notice that Kell Brook within this fight that he had a great amount of success with that lead hand jab because Errol Spence does not have great head movement. He never has. So this narrative of stating that Errol Spence Jr. and Canelo, that they're the same fighter, that's not the case. And on top of that, when you also have certain people like Dante's Boxing Nation or some of these other guys claiming that Spence was way more talented than Canelo Alvarez, actually no. Canelo Alvarez actually in terms of talent is about a couple levels above that of an Errol Spence Jr. because there are a multitude of things that Canelo can do that Spence can never do. It just is what it is. Anyways. And you notice that Kell Brook just caught Errol Spence Jr. twice here with the jab. Once again, when Errol Spence Jr., when he comes in but also leaves the range, when he comes in for an attack, especially with that lead hand, it's not really a super duper duper, great lead hand. It's something that is a little bit more of a probing jab. That's pretty much what it is. Or, he'll kind of use it out there to kind of get his offense off. But it's not really something that is a super great counter punch over the top like that with a Canelo Alvarez or a Terrence Bud Crawford. He can set up certain traps, but mainly on the inside. Errol Spence is not really a great mid-range fighter, nor is he a great fighter on the back foot. When you talk about certain fighters like a Crawford and a Canelo, they pretty much can fight in whatever range that they need to. Now, if you're comparing Canelo and Crawford just side by side, skill for skill, I would say that Canelo was probably the better inside fighter of the two, and that Crawford is probably the better outside fighter of the two, even though they both have the ability to do that, because Terrence Bud Crawford, when you talk about certain exchanges or on the inside or super close, because he does fight a bit taller sometimes because of his height and his reach, he can get hit with certain punches that he really should not be getting hit with, as what we've seen in the Sean Porter fight. Canelo Alvarez has excellent upper body movement. He also knows how to use his forearm and also knows how to use his lead hand and the inside punches and knows how to tie up opponents correctly. Canelo Alvarez is an excellent inside fighter. He's also an extraordinary mid-range fighter. But he also has a couple of very good back foot counters that he really can run you into. He's also excellent up against the ropes. But Errol Spence Jr. is a guy that what you notice, he's a great fighter, but he's not an exceptional fighter in every range like what a Crawford or a Canelo or a Usyk or an Inoue could be. He's not a great multi-dimensional fighter. He pretty much has to be first to the punch in order to mainly be successful, and he's a guy that has to break you down. And if he can't do that, then he's going to have a great amount of problems possibly winning that fight. And that's why in that fight against Crawford, I stated that if Errol Spence is not able to get this in a very ugly fight or in the dirty boxing range, he's not going to win that fight because he's not a better mid-range boxer, nowhere near as a Crawford, and he's also not a better outside range fighter. He cannot beat Crawford if Crawford is going to be on the outside the whole time, somewhat safe and somewhat, overall, once again, in a good place. It's not going to happen. But anyway.
To the thick thighs. There'll be the tactics. Have gone up to super welterweight and vacated the underdog before, and that key hit.
Errol Spence has a very good left to the body. But what you're going to notice once again about Errol Spence is that this is mainly where all his attacks have to happen. He's countering a little bit on the inside. He's kind of jabbing, and then, Kell Brook is trying to throw a counter jab over the top. Now, Errol Spence is now finally, starting to move his head off levels a little bit, which of course is good to a certain degree. But Errol Spence is just a guy that gets caught way, way, way too often. Even at his best and even at his sharpest, because once again, he's never really had great head movement. Canelo Alvarez not only has good head movement, he has phenomenal level head movement and upper body movement. And that's actually a skill that, even though it may not quite seem, that's actually a skill that's harder to acquire than that of quick feet. Now, sometimes quick feet or better feet can be more important because it can get you outside of the range, a little bit better. But upper body movement is actually a skill that's a little bit harder to acquire and harder to attain and a little bit more rare. because if you have great upper body movement, more than likely you can actually even be a little bit more defensively responsible, at least textbook wise, than if you have quick feet. Because I've seen fighters with very, very quick feet and it can get you outside of the range. But what happens if that fighter ends up getting within your range, a fighter that is more skilled than what you're used to? What ends up happening there? Your upper body movement and your defense is going to have to really, counter, somewhat of that, some of their attacks. And Errol Spence Jr. does not have great upper body movement. He has a little bit of upper body movement, but it's nowhere near on the same level of a Crawford or a Usyk or a Canelo Alvarez. Those guys have a natural rhythm that Errol Spence is never going to have.
It is Errol Spence Jr. in the white. Is he a golden fist of Kell Brook?
Another great jab over the top. What you notice there, also, I'm going to rewind this, is that when Errol Spence Jr., once again, when he comes into the range, his head is either at the same tilt or right down the center line. He's not giving you different looks. And then when he backs straight up, he's also pretty much at the same center line, or his head is at the same head tilt. That's pretty much what ends up happening there. So that's why when we compare Canelo Alvarez and Errol Spence Jr., we have to look at all the little idiosyncrasies and some of the details, and we have to know what we look for. Errol Spence here, as you can see, is really trying to break Kell Brook down even in the early portion of the fight, because this is the fight that Errol Spence Jr. wants. This is the fight that Errol Spence Jr. also wanted with Terrence Bud Crawford. He's not a guy that is going to be able to compete with you if you're an excellent mid-range boxer. That's not the type of fighter that Errol Spence Jr. is. I mean, he was able to do it somewhat with Mikey Garcia, but Mikey Garcia also was legitimately smaller than him and a guy that had never fought at 147 before. So, I mean, other than that, Errol Spence is the guy that mainly has to be first. He mainly has to be first to the punch, and there's nothing wrong with that. Pretty much within every fight, sometimes you have to be first to the punch in order to win a fight. But Errol Spence Jr. is a guy to where he has to be first in every single situation, mainly, and a guy to where he is going to have to try to break you down. Because if he were to try Kell Brook at the mid-range the whole entire time, he's probably not winning that fight.
And vacated the underdog before, and that key here. It is.
Good right hand down the middle by Kell Brook, because once again, Errol Spence does not move his head extraordinarily well. Once again, Errol Spence Jr., a lot of the times when he backs out of the range, sometimes it'll be in a straight line. He'll keep his hands down, which is a little bit regular for certain boxers when they move outside of the range at certain times, as long as you don't keep them down way too low, and as long as you're kind of moving back in a half circle and not just backing up in a complete straight line. But Errol Spence Jr. sometimes has a problem of backing up in a straight line, and then on top of that, his head is at the same range as what it was before.
Errol Spence Jr. in the white. Is he a golden fist of Kell Brook?
Good jab over the top again by Kell Brook.
Who's got the itches? And through those 21 wins so far. Southpaw fights an orthodox.
Good jab again by Kell Brook. Once again, this is one of the little details that we can see about Errol Spence Jr. He is not someone that when you take a look in terms of maneuverability or in terms of movement, he's not a Canelo Alvarez. Nowhere near. And that's why I say Terrence Bud Crawford, if he thinks that he's just going to be able to hit Canelo Alvarez as willy-nilly as what he hit in Errol Spence Jr., I don't see that happening. Because Canelo Alvarez, first of all, is one of the greater defensive fighters that you're ever going to see in the ring, at least at his absolute best, or at least at a good portion in his career. He has matured into a defensive master, in my personal view. And then on top of that, he's a guy that has a decent amount of rhythm and upper body movement and maneuverability. This isn't just some Errol Spence guy to where Errol Spence has a little bit of upper body movement. I'm not saying that he's a complete robot, completely stiff, but he's much more stiff than what a Canelo Alvarez is. Just is what it is.
Kell Brook found his range clearly and having some good success here. And up with an uppercut. Spence Jr.'s chin.
See, Spence right now is starting to change levels a little bit more because he realizes he's starting to get hit a little bit too much with that lead hand. But even then, you see that his head is still not changing all that much in terms of the levels. He's not really giving Kell Brook a whole bunch of different new looks in terms of how that jab is going to come in. It either pretty much is, a little bit of the, he's kind of ducked down a little bit and crouched with his head always tilted to his left, by the way, which causes Kell Brook to hit him with a certain amount of right hand straight down the pipe as long as he hits it within the right range or the right angle, because Errol Spence is not really, having a certain rhythm with his head movement.
In the Bundu fight, Kell Brook proved himself.
And that's a good jab by Errol Spence Jr. Kell Brook is keeping his hands down way, way, way too low. Also, keep in mind that Errol Spence has a 3-inch reach advantage, I believe, over that of a Kell Brook. And the reason why Errol Spence was so hit so often against Crawford's jab, not only is because Crawford's jab is so educated and so great for setting up traps, but Spence was never used to that type of reach before. Terrence Crawford is a guy that has a 74 to 75 inch reach, so when he was actually shooting that out at Errol Spence, he was hitting Errol Spence, and Spence had never been used to someone with that range before. So when he was coming into the range, but then also backing out of the range, and his head pretty much was at the same level, he was getting hit with jabs that he didn't really expect to, or that he had never really been hit with before, because he was used to fighting guys with anywhere from a 67 to 69 inch arm reach. Guys like a Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, Yordenis Ugas, or something like that. I mean, Ugas may have been a little bit more lengthier, but he's not someone that, in my view, is, a complete A-plus level fighter. He's someone that's very good, but I don't know about very great, But once again, Danny Garcia, all those guys, they had a severely shorter reach compared to that of a Terrence Bud Crawford.
Over in the States, Spencer backing him up, looking to get him drove down a little bit low. There's that body response from Kell Brook. I mean, he's getting him, was able to get off and keep that distance and just be away from the counter shot that could settle down.
Good right hand straight down the middle by Kell Brook. Once again, you notice that Errol Spence's head, that oftentimes it is straight down the middle. Notice how many times we've seen Kell Brook, and it's 53 seconds into like this 6.5 minute video. Look at how many times we've seen Kell Brook hit Errol Spence flush. We've seen him hit him with at least 2 right hands, maybe about 3 or 4 great counters over the top of the jab. We're going to take a look at Canelo Alvarez in comparison with his next fight and see how hard it is to hit Canelo Alvarez in comparison.
Nice eye-catching shots this round. Good. Spence here, forcing defense. Not great tactics, but this is good work. Turn southpaw.
See, even when Errol Spence Jr. comes in, Errol Spence, kind of like what we've seen with David Morrell against David Benavidez, he comes in with the high guard, which already kind of blinds him to a certain degree, and he pretty much just hopes that his opponent is going to waste his punches on the high guard. And Kell Brook, you can tell, doesn't really know quite how to solve the puzzle of an Errol Spence because he's feeling his size and his power. And Kell Brook, although a very good boxer, he has certain flaws as well. He's not a guy that has an excellent defense. He's a guy that has shorter arms, probably for his size, at about 69 inches of reach. He isn't in the 71 to 72 inch range for reach. And on top of that, he isn't using as much lateral movement as what he needs to. He's doing a very poor job of getting off the ropes and making sure that Errol Spence is tied up correctly.
Fraught with danger. This defense, 31 units, but a good left hand. Brooks always had a pretty solid.
That's one of Errol Spence Jr.'s counters right there. And Errol Spence is not really an elite level counter puncher. He's just not. Errol Spence is a guy that has a couple of counter punches. He has a great left hook to the body in every range, whether he's coming forward or whether it's within the mid-range or whether it's on the back foot. But when you talk about actual counters over the top or within the mid-range, he doesn't have an overabundance of them. Where you compare with a Usyk or a Crawford or an Inoue or a Canelo Alvarez, they are also excellent mid-range level fighters.
Box and that counterpunch with Kell's fast hands and when he's in close, you can see that swing.
Good right hand there by Errol Spence Jr. Kell Brook caught with his guard down.
Light on his feet. Errol Spence trying to work out, screaming all round us at ringside.
Good jab again over the top by Kell Brook.
Spence on his back foot. Kell Brook having to climb.
Good right hand up the middle by Kell Brook. Now, you notice that Errol Spence Jr. tried a good 1-2 on the back foot there. But like I said, Spence, he's a volume puncher. Spence is not a guy that is super crisp nor super sharp with a lot of his counter punches unless it's on the inside. He's a smart boxer to a degree because he can set certain things up with the jab and the lead hand, but it has to be basically when he's coming into you or basically when he's coming first. It just is what it is. And when I say that, of course, I mean that, when he's coming within your range. Like against Sean Porter, what we see is that when he finally knocked him down, he kind of put the lead hand out there, kind of pushed his head down a little bit, then set him up with the great left hook. But if Errol Spence is a guy that mainly has to react to your punches, he's not really going to have a whole lot of answers. Like I said, Errol Spence Jr. is a guy that is not a great counter puncher. He never has been. And like I said, there are no problems with being first within the fight. That's great. But Spence is a guy that pretty much is only great within one range. He's very awkward within the mid-range, and he's also very awkward on the back foot unless you're not really that talented of a boxer or B, you're smaller than him. It just is what it is.
Desperate. Every single fight. But now he's under pressure. Now he's in with real tension.
Good right hand again, right down the middle by Kell Brook.
And there's the right hand of Kell Brook. And Spencer feeling that. Kell Brook landing some nice shots, but Spencer just sending himself.
And Kell Brook also is doing a terrible job of getting his shots in there and then getting back out of range. He's throwing 1 or 2 shots, but then he's not really using his foot movement quite enough to really get outside of the range. He has a great jab over the top, but he's not using his feet really whatsoever near enough within this fight. And against a fighter like a Errol Spence Jr., you have to really suffocate their offense by using your feet. And then on top of that, when they finally get within range, creating a vacated space and a vacated distance, by creating and occupying the vacated space by trying to turn them around, kind of like what a Crawford did against an Errol Spence Jr. And on top of that, when you tie him up, tie him up correctly. Put both of your arms under their armpits or put them with their arms and really wrap them up. Try to actually show that you're within the fight. Kell Brook had the same problem within this fight that Caleb Plant did against Canelo. They both tried to tie up, the lead hands of Errol Spence Jr. and Canelo Alvarez. And then they said, okay, well, you have both of your hands on my one hand right here. I'm just going to use my other hand and, hit you in the kidney, hit you, on the shoulders, hit you in the body, hit you on the side of the head. You have to really tie up both weapons, not just one.
Any weakness to his opponent. Brook is backed up on the ropes and shipping some of these bodies. Errol Spence trying to get some. But Spence Jr. has solved every single puzzle in front of our own Dave Paris. Adelaide Bird down.
And it's that Errol Spence Jr. that he kind of got thrown off a little bit of balance there. Errol Spence is a guy that has relatively good feet, but he's a guy that can sometimes get caught overall to be a little bit off balance. He's been thrown off balance multiple times throughout a multitude of fights. You'll see it here, you'll see it in the Sean Porter fight, and you'll see it in other fights as well.
Right, taste the canvas. Final round. I can't see he's able to manhandle Spence here early on and look back with that left hand and lean on him. He's come in at about 11-10. Will it come down to weight?
Good little left there by that of a Kell Brook, and I believe that Errol Spence returned with the left as well. But like I said, you take a look there. Spence is not someone that is exceptional on the back foot. He's just not. And like I said, you notice that when he's backing up, he's very awkward. He's a guy that, pretty much is just throwing the throw and pretty much keeping busy, which I don't completely think is a bad idea. I think that can be a very good thing. But like I said, Errol Spence, when he backs up, he backs usually sometimes in a direct straight line. And, even worse, his head is oftentimes, straight down the middle. It's at the same tilt. He doesn't change levels very well. Whereas with Crawford or Canelo, when they're backing up, you can see their upper body movement and their head levels change. They're going to give you different looks.
Down to step. Really, Kell Brook. Oh, right hand.
Good right hand, right up the middle by that of a Kell Brook, which happened because once again, Errol Spence Jr.'s head oftentimes returns in the same range.
From Brook, Peach in the shot. Trained on those lines and circles in the Wicker gym, but one or two others at ringside feel it's closer. Was that a crucial round?
Good little shot to the body by Errol Spence Jr., but once again, what you notice there is that he was actually pushed off balance. Like I said, even though Errol Spence Jr., even though he has relatively good feet, he can be pushed off balance because he feels very awkward on the back foot and within the mid-range. He mainly, like I said, has to be breaking you down, and if that's not happening, he's not going to have a great amount of success.
To hang on there, looking a bit ragged as he tries to deliver body shots. His heart and his fitness.
Good right down the middle once again because Errol Spence Jr.'s head remains at the same tilt. He's not moving his head off the center line when he's coming in, nor when he's backing out. Like I said, he has very little actual rhythm when it comes to his movement.
We're going to find out because Brook's working, but he just seems to be in front middleweight. He took some of Gennady Golovkin's on his feet against Gennady Golovkin up the middleweight. It's terrible, obscured his vision. So in the eye, and Steely family's over. He looking strong feel to the Texan. Spence Jr. not giving him a break. But Brook continues. Errol Spence Jr. and neither.
And Kell Brook is trying here, but I don't think that at this point in time in the fight that he actually thought that he was going to beat Errol Spence Jr. I think that Kell Brook always knew that Errol Spence was going to be a little bit of a tough task. But right here, he needs to be setting up his jab a lot better, throwing feints to the body, stabbing that jab to the body, and using his feet, trying to use his feet to really outduel that of an Errol Spence Jr. Because why are you right in front of him within punching range? Your hands are down pretty much the whole entire time. You need to keep them up a little bit more. But to be honest, Kell Brook has never really been a defensive master fighter. He's always had a little bit of a leaky defense. Pretty much what you've seen here is pretty much what he's been throughout his whole entire career. Kell Brook is a guy that's an A-grade level fighter, but he's not as skilled as what certain people overall would think that he is. And I mean, that's not me trying to discredit Errol Spence Jr. whatsoever or any man that beat Kell Brook. But Kell Brook is a guy that, on the surface, like I've always stated, just because he has quicker feet and because of the way that he boxes, they may take a look at him as this A-plus skilled level boxer or this guy that is an A-plus, slickster. And, he's a guy that is a relatively good slick fighter, but he's a guy that also has a lot of faults. He has a very leaky defense. He's a guy that doesn't use lateral movement quite good enough, at least when he needs to. He is tying up Errol Spence to a very poor degree. He's not really doing things correctly within that matter. And on top of that, he's not really setting up his jab very well enough. Now, he has a great counter jab over the top. One of the better and one of the best counter jabs over the top in the business. But in terms of actually throwing feints and, also at certain times stabbing that jab to the body, which is one of the most important punches, if not the most important punch to really get off in the beginning, Kell Brook's not doing any of that.
Turn him off and get back behind that jab. I think the pressure from Kell Brook.
Like I said, take a look at what Kell Brook's doing when Errol Spence Jr. is on the inside. He's wrapping around Errol Spence Jr.'s head, but it doesn't really matter because Errol Spence Jr. can still get the other punch off. Because so like I said, this is the similar thing that Caleb Plant did in the Canelo Alvarez fight. Like, you have to tie him up like you mean it. Like what Evander Holyfield did against Mike Tyson when Tyson was trying to blast him with combinations or those good one-shot power shots, those killer shots on the inside. Holyfield made sure to block and then kind of suffocate his offense and then tie up Mike Tyson by tying up both of his arms, not just one, and then pushing him back up against the ropes. And it frustrated Mike Tyson because Tyson's offense was very suffocated. And then in return, Evander Holyfield was returning with some major good shots on the inside. Kell Brook is doing a very poor job here in terms of tying up Errol Spence Jr. A very poor job.
Just slightly slowed down, and that's.
And then that little left hand lands against Kell Brook, which would contribute, of course, later on to Kell Brook getting stopped.
As well,
and you got to understand that this is the type of fight that Errol Spence Jr. wants. He wants to throw the amount of volume. He wants to be first. He wants you to tie him up inappropriately or not the best way so he can get some of those shots off. Errol Spence wants a dirty boxing type of performance. That's what he's mainly looking for. Now, is there certain times where he might have a little success in the mid-range or, maybe boxing, maybe slightly. But Errol Spence is a guy that has to break you down. That's mainly what he is. All right, he has to have success within that way. And Kell Brook is just doing certain things that are very wrong within this fight.
Well, if we ever had any concern, it would have been Kell Brook here. Manny Pacquiao having that speed at this minute. And comes Kell Brook, tip times.
Good right again there by Kell Brook.
He really had to fault it, Kell Brook, to get that success.
And there you go again with Errol Spence Jr. Once again, when he's on the back foot, he's really not that comfortable. And sometimes Errol Spence Jr., he can kind of be caught with his feet shuffling. Once again, this is like the third time just within this fight alone that we've seen Errol Spence Jr. really thrown off balance. Now, Canelo Alvarez isn't a guy that's always as on his toes or as quick-footed maybe as an Errol Spence to a certain degree, but in terms of foot positioning and being thrown off balance, you're never going to see that with Canelo Alvarez. You're never going to see Canelo Alvarez, at least throughout the majority of his fights, ever thrown off balance like this. Now, Bivol was able to kind of throw him a little bit off balance because of that lead hand when Canelo would take in long steps and then on top of that, really start to move in, by being a little bit too back foot heavy. And then, of course, it would kind of throw him off of his game a little bit, or maybe it was, too front foot heavy. I'd have to rewatch it. But anyways, the point is that Canelo Alvarez, like within that fight, he was able to be thrown a little bit more off balance because of the way that he was moving and Bivol's jab and size. But Errol Spence Jr. is a guy where he's a little bit too easy to move off balance.
When he does that strength tells, and here he comes again. Spencer looking quite comfortable and that sharp jab. Kell Brook seems to have just Spence, but as soon as he's got room.
So you see how Errol Spence is just coming in there with a high guard and he's pretty much waiting for Kell Brook to return fire, suffocate the offense, pretty much just with a high guard and then return some of those shots. Kell Brook is doing a very, very poor job trying to work around the high guard. He's also doing a very poor job using the movement within this fight to his advantage.
And he can utilize close. Brook's able to lean on him, but
good left hand by Errol Spence Jr.
He's landing left against the experience of the 31-year. Good shot from Spence and a lovely response from Kell Brook. Yeah, suddenly he looks strong again. Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence.
Good right hand down the middle again by that of Kell Brook.
You've still got Brook a couple up, but losing the last couple of rounds, he seemed to have dropped them. And this was the period of the fight that many, with that weight making, at this level, over this distance. Pace and Spencer has had some strike. Well, Brook got the extra pressure of the two. Worrying there. His accuracy at this sort of range against a southpaw, a fast southpaw that's still in.
That's why I say every time that Kell Brook is up against the ropes, he doesn't really seem like he's trying to tie up Errol Spence Jr. that much, which tells me that either A, that he has a major hole in that part of his game, or B, that he also didn't really believe that he was going to beat Errol Spence Jr. within that fight, and that it was just going to be worse for him. You have to dare to be great within those situations, like what Evander Holyfield did against Mike Tyson. Sometimes you have to really be willing to muffle their offense. Canelo also kind of did that with Gennady Golovkin in the rematch. But Kell Brook here is just, you can tell that he doesn't actually believe that he's going to win that battle on the inside of that, that he's not going to be able to really stop the force that is Errol Spence Jr. And in return, he was correct, because he was not able to do the certain things that were necessary in order to win this fight.
Really applying the pressure now. Big left hook from really noticeable. It's Spence Jr. in the driving seat, and there's a right hand, and these are worrying moments for Kell Brook and his team. Oh, big shots from Errol Spence Jr. Kell Brook hurt there, let's not forget he's against at the 9th round, and here comes Spence.
Kell Brook, when Errol Spence is doing that sometimes, he should be trying to throw a right hand straight down the pipe, then kind of blocking, trying to create, a distance, or then tying up, and then trying to get Errol Spence with maybe another punch and getting the hell out of dodge. But Kell Brook, you can tell, like, he fought a little bit afraid throughout this whole entire fight. And I know that certain people are going to say, what are you talking about? Kell Brook, he fought like a man throughout the whole entire fight, right? But there are certain things that Kell Brook could have did that, to be quite honest with you, I don't think that he really did. And maybe that's just because he's not as skilled a fighter as what we once upon a time thought that he was. But I mean, Errol Spence sometimes will load up on his offense and sometimes advertise some of the punches when he's coming forward. And Kell Brook is he's pretty much just waiting for the attack up against the ropes.
Shipped some heavy shots there from Spence, who can see the damage he's doing as Brook backs up here. Has got Errol Spence now in the lead, and I think for the first time in the fight, Kell Brook managed much more success in the last few minutes. Kell Brook's hurt here, and he's down in the 10th round. Brook, this is desperate time. He's badly injured now with that eye, and here comes Spence again. Errol Spence Jr. on the verge, string all over the ring. He's going to be taken out here. The championship is about to change hands, surely. Kell Brook needs... What a man Kell Brook is, what a fighter. He's not going to give up. This is unbelievable, because it's a torrid round for Kell Brook. How he's still in this, still up for the first time in the fight. He might need to stop him if he's going to keep the 5 rounds he's had. Sharp shooter who's proving very much his worth.
Once again, and good 1-2 there by Kell Brook, but he's just doing a very poor job of getting out of the range. The fight is pretty much done at this point, and I know that certain people may be taking a look at Kell Brook and being like, he's really trying to win this fight, and he's trying to win the fight to a degree, but I think he were to realize that this isn't really the way to beat Errol Spence Jr. Like, if you're in this firefight with Errol Spence Jr., you pretty much already lost the fight. The way that Crawford was able to beat Errol Spence Jr. is that he was able to keep him at bay and keep him within the mid-range, and also within that of the outside range. That's where you have to keep Errol Spence Jr. because he has certain disadvantages that you can take advantage of if you keep him at that range. But if he gets in a dogfight with you, that's the type of fight that Errol Spence wants. And then on top of that, he's relatively very strong for that weight class. So, that's not the fight that you want.
Behind his boxing now, Brook, but he doesn't want... And here comes Spence, after that minute rest. Eye against Errol Spence, but he's gone down on one knee. He can hardly see...
And that pretty much is about the end of that fight. Kell Brook, of course, eventually, he took the 10 count, I believe. I don't really blame him for quitting because at the end of the day, the man had a broken orbital eye bone. But anyways, Errol Spence, of course, he did a relatively good job within this fight. But like I said, take a look at how many times that Errol Spence Jr. got hit flush. And Kell Brook is a guy that he's a very good boxer, but he also makes a certain amount of mistakes. But he is an A-grade level talent, or at least he was at this point in time in his career. But let's take a look at Canelo Alvarez and let's compare and contrast what they both do differently and both of their advantages and disadvantages. Let's take a look. All right, so we're going to take a look at this highlight video, which is by Boxing Legaccy. And this is going to be showing the fight between that of Daniel Jacobs, who, of course, was, I believe, one of the middleweight champions at this current moment in time. He was coming off of the victory over the undefeated Ukrainian fighter Sergey Derevchenko, or Derevchenko, however you want to pronounce it. I never really considered Sergey Derevchenko as someone that was really an A-grade level fighter. I thought that he was very stiff and someone that pretty much relied a lot on the high guard, but he was a relatively tough fighter. And Danny Jacobs, of course, was the first one to defeat him in a fight of two of the better middleweights in the world. And, of course, Danny Jacobs was able to become a two-time middleweight champion. Of course, Canelo Alvarez, this was right after the Gennady-Golovkin rematch. So this was looked at as a very big fight for both of them. And it was looked at as a fight that was considerable and one of the bigger fights within boxing, or at least one of the better ones. But let's take a look and see what Canelo Alvarez is able to do. By the way, this video is by Boxing Legaccy. And we're going to take a look at the differences between Canelo Alvarez and Errol Spence Jr. Let's get into it. Now, when you take a look at the size here, you can tell that there's a clear size difference, and you can tell that Danny Jacobs is the bigger man. And this is why I say that when certain people say that Canelo and Crawford, like, oh, well, Crawford won in his fourth weight class, Canelo lost at a fourth weight class against Bivol. Canelo Alvarez is a guy that really doesn't even belong at 168 pounds. This was at 160. This is really the division that Canelo Alvarez really belongs more at. So that's why I say Crawford very rarely has ever fought any actual legitimate great talents that have actually been bigger than him. I mean, Victor Postol was a little bit bigger than him, but to be quite honest with you, Victor Postol is probably about an A- level fighter at best. He's very stiff. He doesn't handle lateral movement very well. He's a guy that, in my view, he's a relatively good boxer, but, I'm not quite sure if I would say that he's on the level of, say, a Danny Jacobs or a Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders, at least in terms of all-around talent. I understand that he knocked out Lucas Matisse, but Matisse was also significantly shorter and not as lengthy as a Victor Postol. Just is what it is. And I know that certain people will say, well, what does that have to do with anything? It has to do with the weight, not the height. No, height and reach are also a big factor as well. All right, it just is what it is, especially if you have power and you're a very decent level athlete. Of course, reach and size, they are going to matter. All right? But anyways, let's take a look at this. Let's see what Canelo Alvarez does. Now, the thing that you notice about Canelo Alvarez immediately that we don't see with Errol Spence Jr. is that when Canelo Alvarez is coming out, Canelo Alvarez's head is already moving off the center line. Now, you have to be very careful because if you overcompensate or if you move it too repetitively in the same patterns or within the same directions or at the same tilt, your opponent can time you and, of course, set you up for a good shot or possibly outbox you or score certain points that, of course, you wouldn't want that to happen. But Canelo Alvarez, as you can tell, has a natural rhythm here. He's not completely within punching range. At times is what an Errol Spence Jr. would be. He's putting his hands up, here and there, and then on top of that, kind of putting them back down. So, the high guard is not blinding him the whole entire time, or blinding him, the whole entire time. But then on top of that, he's also inviting, certain punches to come in so he can counter within the mid-range. And on top of that, even when he is putting his hands down, his hands are always within range of his face, which is something that we did not see with that of a Kell Brook. Now, when it comes to Errol Spence Jr., we see in his hands someone always be up within the range of his face. It's just that his head is always either at the same tilt or usually down the center line. Canelo's head is very rarely caught down the center line, at least consistently, at his best. But of course, this was Canelo pretty much at his absolute peak here. I don't think that Canelo is any longer really at his peak. I don't think he's really been at his peak for about 3 or 4 years. But I mean, anyway.
How the whips and whirls unfold. Jacobs just hard done by that night.
You see the upper body movement that Canelo Alvarez has there? Let's rewind this very quickly. Let's see what Canelo Alvarez does.
He's at ringside. So too, Triple G for this latest installment. How the whips and whirls unfold.
See, even when Danny Jacobs throws a double jab there, Canelo Alvarez is right outside the range. He's blocking the jab very, very well. And he moves back in order to once again make sure that he doesn't get hit with the jab. He's a guy that has tremendous, tremendous upper body movement. And this is something that is a skill that oftentimes more than not goes a little bit unnoticed with certain people. A lot of people pay attention to certain feet, and just because someone may have quicker feet, they may say, oh, he moves better than this other guy. Well, they may move better in the feet, but do they also move better in terms of the upper body movement? Canelo Alvarez, in terms of upper body movement, he's up there with any boxer that I've ever personally seen. And when you talk about a fighter for his generation, there are two fighters that probably have the best upper body movement for their particular generation are probably Canelo Alvarez and Usyk. But to be fair, Crawford would be up there as well. Crawford would be up there. It's just sometimes he can get caught a little bit too tall and having his chin a little bit too high up in the air, especially if you get within his range. Like you can tell that, he's used to having a longer reach than certain fighters. He's not as good of an inside fighter as Canelo, although he's still a tremendous inside level fighter. Talking about Crawford.
Jacobs just hard done by that night.
You see how Canelo Alvarez is changing levels there? And that sometimes he'll dip back and, sometimes he'll move his head once again. This is something already just within the first 10 seconds that we did not see from Errol Spence Jr., at least to anywhere near of this degree as what we've seen from Canelo. Let's continue.
He seems to have that sort of control.
Excellent shot in the mid-range by Canelo Alvarez. Now, Errol Spence Jr. does have that little counter. There's a couple of ways that you can counter within the mid-range. You can kind of, duck under their punches and slip over the top. You might be able to kind of set them up, while they're coming in. And also, you might be able to kind of shell up a little bit like that, while they're throwing a punch, kind of deflect it or block it and then, quickly return fire. Of course, in that situation, Canelo Alvarez did the latter. But Canelo is a master at mid-range fighting.
Front of Jacobs is able to back him up, and then the shots land even on the arms. They force Jacobs back.
Good little left hand there by Danny Jacobs. Probably the flushest punch that, he's going to land, at least in the beginning part of this fight. And even that was a slight punch. But once again, let's continue. Let's see what Canelo Alvarez does. One thing I will say about Canelo is this. You can tell that when he starts to kind of lose respect for certain opponents' boxing ability, that he will become a little bit more hittable. But, that kind of happens with all boxers. I've seen it with Inoue, against that of no need to donaire in the second half of the fight. I also seen it with I believe Inoue against that of a Marlon Tapales, and a Steve Von Fulton. He became a slight amount more hittable when he realized that those guys really weren't going to have anything on him. I seen it with Crawford as well against Sean Porter and Aegis Velasquez. So that happens at certain times. But Canelo Alvarez, one thing I will state is this. Sometimes, he did get a bit overconfident in certain fights to where he would throw a hook or something like that, or he would throw a punch, and then he did not expect his opponent to return fire as quick as what they did, and he would get caught with his hands down. You've seen that a little bit against Dimitri Bivol. And, Canelo was still relatively good defensively within that fight. It's just that, Canelo was completely exhausted, throughout the first half of that fight, or pretty much throughout the whole entire fight, after the first 4 rounds. But had Canelo not had the slipping or the parrying ability or the upper body movement, he probably would have got stopped in that fight.
Back up Alvarez, doesn't he?
He does, yes, but it's just evident immediately.
Notice when Canelo Alvarez throws the lead hand that he's changing levels at certain times. There's some times where he throws the jab to where he's a little bit more high and straight. There's certain times to where he kind of ducks down a little bit more at a tilt within the mid-range. And then there's time where he ducks down even lower to go to the body. He's always mixing things up. Errol Spence is not a guy that mixes things up to a great degree. He's just not.
Good quick hands there. Following the strategy.
Good defense from Jacob.
He was game and brave at
Good jab through the guard by Canelo Alvarez. Canelo, by the way, has one of the best jabs and one of the best lead hands you're ever going to see for a pure level boxer.
totally outclassed, and he He's tried the body early, so too.
You see how Canelo Alvarez is moving right there? Once again, Danny is coming in with the jab, and then Canelo kind of tightens up his guard, but then he takes one step back to make sure that the next punch, whether it's a jab or whether it's a right hand, that it's not going to land, or at least not land completely flush, and then he ducks under to another level to make sure that he's mixing things up. Like I said, Canelo's upper body movement, people take a look at certain fighters, for example, and they say like, oh, he's a way better mover because, he has quicker feet, but having quicker feet doesn't always mean that you have all around better movement. That's why I say having upper body movement at times, it can actually be a little bit more important than the feet. Unless you have completely just cement feet like Andrew Ruiz. Now, I mean, Canelo in certain fights has had a little bit of cement feet, but, once he started getting a little bit older and mature, his feet did become a little bit quicker. Not Floyd Mayweather or Terrence Bud Crawford speed levels or anything like that, or Usyk or Lomachenko level speed. But at the end of the day, it got quicker.
Canelo just seems to be in control.
It's stuck in the mud at the moment. Jacobs comes back with a right hand, but Alvarez is away in his defense.
Once again, look at how hard it is to hit Canelo Alvarez.
Advantage in there tonight, but remember Alvarez.
The best of Jacobs, even at 32.
Once again, take a look when Canelo was throwing that jab, when he's changing levels.
Still here, Jacobs with these body punches.
Good left hand there by Canelo Alvarez. Now what you notice is that after he landed that left hook, sometimes Canelo's got to keep his hands up a bit tighter within some of these exchanges, but I think he realizes that that he's not really trying to throw with him at the current moment in time. So Canelo, I think, is getting a bit overconfident in some of these exchanges. But Canelo Alvarez, what you notice is right after that left hook that he put a lead hand there. And the reason why he put a lead hand there is so he could suffocate Danny's offense, or on top of that, blind him, or really put him in position. More than likely the latter two, to either A, blind him, or really to move him and put his momentum to his own favor so he could land a certain punch, so he could control Danny's positioning. I always stated this. The greatest of boxers don't just use their lead hand for a jab or a weapon. They also use it for a multi-purpose tool. They use it as a distance range finder and a keeper. They use it as a blinding tool to set up a certain punch, and they also use it as a momentum shifter, or to move your opponent into certain positions and places. And they also use it for feints and fakes, and a parry.
Try me. So strong. He's able to just walk forward at will. Range now. He's looking for that big shot. Got to be careful not to overload it.
Well, as Jacobs gets a good jab in.
Good right hand over the top by Canelo Alvarez. Once again, Canelo was a guy that is excellent within the mid-range of boxing. Spence is a guy that can land certain shots within the mid-range, but he's not a guy that, once again, is a very reactionary fighter. He's a guy that mainly has to be first and try to break you down incrementally. That's what he does. Canelo can do that, but he also can fight extremely well in the mid-range. He also can fight a little bit on the back foot. Not as well as someone with quick feet, but someone that still can fight relatively well and pretty good to great on the back foot, but he's extraordinary within the inside and mid-range.
Back, and he's on his back foot constantly.
Once again, take a look at how hard it is to hit Canelo Alvarez there, even with Danny Jacobs being very speedy. Now, what I will state is this. Danny Jacobs doesn't really have as good of an educated jab or a counter jab over the top as what a Kell Brook did. It's really more of a volume and a probing jab. But Danny Jacobs still has a relatively good jab. But once again, take a look at how hard it is to hit Canelo Alvarez within this fight.
Really getting anything going himself, Jacob.
Once again, take a look at all those punches. Danny Jacobs just threw about several different jabs and a couple of power punches. Not one of them landed. Because you're never going to find Canelo Alvarez's head always within the same range or at the same tilt, usually like an Errol Spence Jr.'s. And on top of that, he's an excellent distance judge. He's an excellent judger of distance.
God, nice and tight when he needs to. He's able to just put the pressure
And the freshness on Jacobs.
Notice when Canelo Alvarez also throws the hand that he moves his head to another level, or the jab that he moves his head to another level, or he quickly gets out of range, with that lead hand so he can possibly come back with a counter, and that he's also not going to be hit. That's not something that you see with Errol Spence Jr. What Errol Spence Jr. does when he throws the lead hand, he'll come forward, he'll throw a couple of jabs, and then either A, his head will be remain within the same tilt. He might, duck his head a little bit under, especially if he's coming within the range, or, which also is likely, he's going to throw the jab and then quickly, have a centered head on the center line, but, he's going to have the high guard. Canelo Alvarez, he'll have a high guard, but he also will move his head out of range. That's why I say their movement is not even close.
Good work there from... Felt it slightly in an uppercut. Tight and in burst.
Once again, take a look at how hard it is to hit Canelo Alvarez. We've seen Errol Spence just within the first couple of minutes within the highlights, overall. We've seen him, basically get hit by I don't know how many power shots. Now, to be fair, that highlight video was a bit shorter than what this is, but you could take a look at this whole 13-minute highlight video. And Canelo Alvarez, I'm pretty sure gets hit with half the amount of punches that Errol Spence Jr. does, if not even a quarter of them, overall. And, Spence, that was shown basically throughout the whole entire, fight. And that was a 6-minute little clip. This is a 12-minute or 13-minute clip. And Canelo Alvarez, you can tell it's extraordinarily hard to hit him.
Canelo, so the pressure's all on Canelo here, but he's boxing well on his back foot. He's looking for the counter.
He's got the big fight delivered.
There's an argument that is correct, a correct statement. I mean, Canelo, 28 years old, this early on.
He's become much more versatile over the years. Nani Golovkin and Danny Jones.
Good job there by Canelo Alvarez. And what you also know about Canelo, and I'll also give Errol Spence Jr. this amount of credit too, whenever they do throw their lead hand, their opposite hand is glued to the opposite side of their face, or it's glued to the side of their face. Meaning what? That if you return possibly with a left or a right hook or whatever you're trying to counter them with, it's not going to be easy because they have their hand defending their face.
12 rounds to end the second round. Fascinating.
Yeah, it just looks so strong. Canelo as he backs up Jacobs in, puts some shots together. Looks like when the shots landed.
Tries to fend him off with the jab and defense, but...
Once again, Canelo Alvarez, when he throws that double jab, he's changing levels. You're not going to find his head at a similar tilt. Now, Canelo sometimes is getting a bit too repetitive of where his head is going to be with that jab, but at least he's mixing things up. Canelo Alvarez, and on top of that, once again, he throws the lead hand and he quickly gets back out of range. And he's also very good, even though he doesn't have very quick feet, he's very good at getting his opponents to overextend so he can counter with something.
Get that jab through as well. Good from Jacobs.
Good little body shot there by Danny Jacobs.
Just felt he needed that on the left because of balance.
And 32. When you get into your 30s, you slow down physically.
You're protecting Jacobs, and that's opening up his power shot.
We don't want to see that.
Now, Canelo, one thing I will say is this. He's got to be very careful because sometimes when he throws that right hand, like I said, this is one thing that you do notice about Canelo. One of the defensive possible flaws in his style, but he usually sharpens up on it once he sees that his opponent is actually to be taken seriously. Canelo Alvarez, sometimes when he throws that right hand, sometimes his hand does not return to his face as quick as what it should. Now, oftentimes he's very defensively responsible with the jab and with the lead hand, but sometimes he can be caught throwing an overhand, or sometimes he can be caught throwing a right hand or something like that, and then not returning his hands back to his face in time. So he's got to be very careful with that.
Body shots in and that destruction of poor Rocky Fielding.
Pressure that he needs to be under mentally and certainly not physically in the fight with his last couple. Just constantly got Jacobs on his back foot.
Yeah, just missing there. You can hardly be heard.
Nice little try by the right hand by Danny Jacobs, but Canelo Alvarez mainly slipped that. By the way, Canelo Alvarez is great at slipping punches and making sure that the momentum of the punches from his opponent coming in his direction are not mainly going to affect him, at least with full force. That's what slipping can do with the punch, because if you're able to slip with it, then that means that it's not going to land full force.
The Mexicans that
He's been at middleweight longer, but Canelo's just so solid.
Left up high, he's known for left up to the body, but he's throwing a left up high.
Good try by Danny Jacobs there with the stab to the body, but Canelo Alvarez, he oftentimes knows how to counter that as well. When certain people jab to his body, he kind of pushes them back, or he may counter with the jab, or he may try to go with the uppercut of the right hand as well, or try to back you up when you're doing that. So when you do that, it's a great thing to do, but then at certain times with someone like Canelo, you might have to move off the range and really try to use your feet.
impressive.
Yeah, that was better. He was able to get through the guard as well of Canelo.
You see how Canelo Alvarez is using this lead hand like that? He's placing Danny Jacobs' head and also his body into a position where he's trying to land the right hand. Both Crawford and Canelo Alvarez are experts at placing their opponents in a certain range or in a certain position in order to get their offense off. Spence is very good at that too, to a degree. Like, he'll know how to kind of probe the jab and blind his opponent even at mid-range, but he's, exceptional within the inside range. And for those of you that remember when Spence knocked down Porter, it was because he faked, I believe, with a lead right hand hook, and Sean Porter ducked under it. Well, Errol Spence just kept his lead hand, or his hand, his forearm on Sean Porter's head, so he couldn't really duck up immediately. He kept it there long enough so he could hit him with the left hook. So the best of boxers know how to use that lead hand, not just for a weapon, but for a multi-purpose tool.
Listen to the vociferous crowd as well. As Jacobs gets a good
great from Alvarez. He's just slipping and sliding and making
natural middle now. Canelo.
look how solid he looks walking.
To try and befuddle and confuse Alvarez. To the body from Alvarez.
Now, one thing that you notice about Canelo Alvarez, and he did get hit with the jab there by Danny Jacobs about a minute ago. So Canelo's got to be careful with that. But Canelo Alvarez also knows how to kind of pump fake, with the double jab as well. He also knows how to throw a great double jab, which is something that Errol Spence Jr. does, but it's not with the sharpness nor the crispness of a Canelo. And Canelo also can have a very good counter jab over the top when he needs to as well. Errol Spence is not someone that has that.
Back from Alvarez, the right hand partially blocked that body shot, got through, and Jacobs
can't afford to make a mistake, Jacobs, you can just see that Canelo, that right.
And it's the electric pace of...
Like I said, right there, Canelo Alvarez, he just threw 3 right hands, but Danny Jacobs, he didn't really dare to throw with Canelo Alvarez in the exchange. Sometimes you have to throw with an opponent while they're about to throw a punch, or quickly right after they're going to throw a punch, or maybe right when they're going to. At least at times. You kind of have to punch with them at certain times. But, certain opponents, so they can realize that they're in there not only with a great athlete, but also a great boxer, sometimes it discourages them. And Danny Jacobs is a guy that, he's an A-grade level fighter, but he's not really someone that is, technically all across the board, or at least in terms of setting up traps, a quote-unquote expert, in my personal view.
Alvarez,
he's able to just constantly just bring his feet forward and just back up Canelo.
For the New Yorker.
Now, Canelo Alvarez, of course, was able to block that lead hand or that left hook, I believe, and then, of course, come back to the body with the left hook. That is one of Canelo Alvarez's favorite counters.
In his prime, and his Jacobs just slightly past it.
Very, very good. He's up the torso movement.
Good little shovel hook there by Canelo Alvarez. Danny Jacobs should have been more outside the range, and on top of that, he should have kept his hand up a little bit more. Danny Jacobs is not doing a good enough job establishing distance against Canelo Alvarez, nor using his feet. But like I said, Danny is a very good boxer. He's just not someone that is an A-plus skilled level boxer in terms of his all-around technique. He's a guy that has very good technique, and he's an A-grade level boxer. It's not like he's a shit boxer, but he's not someone that is as intelligent, kind of like Kell Brook. Both Danny Jacobs and Kell Brook, they're kind of on a similar level. Danny Jacobs is bigger than Canelo than what Kell Brook was for Spence, I suppose, but they both make certain mistakes.
He's becoming much more improved.
Jacobs is trying desperately hard to get something
Good little right hand on the inside by Danny Jacobs.
going. Right down from Alvarez. Last around.
Hey, that fucker can't come up here no more. All right.
Lomachenko to regain the belt that he... Shane Mosley, Mayweather, James Kirk.
Once again, take a look at how much upper body movement there is from Canelo Alvarez. He's moving his head in a natural, side-to-side momentum. Then on top of that, he kind of slips back and then will jab and then kind of always has it in a certain rhythm. Errol Spence does not have that rhythm. There are certain fighters that are just born with that, and certain fighters that are able to be taught that, and certain fighters that are just not able to be taught that. Like when you talk about certain fighters like Errol Spence, like 2 of the fighters that Terence Bud Crawford ended up fighting within that of an Errol Spence Jr. and also that of a Victor Postol, those guys have very, very stiff head movement. Like that's something that those guys are never going to have. Now, is that me discrediting those wins in any way? Absolutely not. But they just don't have great natural head movement. That's why I say when people say all this stuff about, Crawford, he beat Postol and Spence and they brought up the size, right? But Canelo isn't just bigger than Crawford. He's on a whole nother skill level compared to any fighter that Crawford has ever fought.
Cotto, Amir Khan, of course, Golovkin.
Look at how hard it is once again to hit Canelo Alvarez flush.
Couple of I don't know if he's run out of ideas or he just can't.
Good stabbing jab to the body by Canelo Alvarez. Once again, that punch right there, that punch is the secret for a lot of the all-time great level boxers. Mayweather, Canelo, I believe Roy Jones Jr. to a degree. Some other ones that I'm probably not thinking of. To be fair, I didn't watch enough of Sugar Ray Leonard nor Roberto Duran to really comment on them, so I can't tell you about them. But, Usyk, all those guys.
Probably
In a way.
most of these rounds. Jacobs still very much in this. Utilised the whole ring and moves.
Stop, no. There you go.
And he needs some success from somewhere. One of his
Jacobs is struggling to land on Canelo because Canelo's defense has been brilliant.
He is struggling. I don't think there's anything really clean though. There's no
speedy shot.
And even the announcers just recently stated that it's so hard to see what Danny Jacobs is landing because, nothing is really landing cleanly because Canelo Alvarez's defense is so spectacular. But anyway.
That was excellently blocked there from Alvarez.
Yeah, quality block
From Alvarez with his back.
Good little 1-2 there by Danny Jacobs. Canelo Alvarez got caught being a little bit too lazy within that exchange. Like I said, Canelo, there are certain times to where you might be able to take advantage, especially if he doesn't take you as seriously or notices that he's starting to outbox you throughout the course of a fight and he realizes that he's starting to stack up rounds. You can catch him sometimes dropping his hands a bit lower than what he needs to, but oftentimes it's just super hard to get within that guard because Canelo Alvarez is blocking and parrying extraordinarily well and always changing levels and moving extraordinarily well. Now, is it possible that maybe Crawford can catch Canelo with something that, Canelo, he's getting a little bit overconfident within the fight because he's starting to stack up rounds and maybe Crawford can hit him with something? You never know, but I don't know if Crawford's power is going to be anywhere near as effective as what it needs to be in order to actually hurt Canelo, at least consistently.
To the ropes.
You have to be concentrating and looking at every counter.
Good body work by that Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez is within the inside range. He kind of places his head up near Danny Jacobs' gloves, lands a very good body shot, then throws another right hand because he realizes that Danny Jacobs, with the longer height and reach and longer arms, that Danny Jacobs is not going to be able to return fire, as quick as what a Canelo was. And then, of course, Canelo, what he does, once again, he uses his lead hand as a momentum changer, as a momentum shifter. He puts it on Danny Jacobs' gloves, and then he pushes him back so he can't throw anything, and he throws a right hand. Once again, Canelo, certain people take a look at him and they're like, oh, he's just a straightforward pressure fighter. Those guys have no idea what the hell they're talking about. This dude is a genius-level boxer.
Well, Canelo was able to... There's no wonder he looks so accomplished, so solid and confident. He is very strong, and you can hear the punches landing, and you can see the effect.
Good double jab by Canelo Alvarez.
They have even night. If he doesn't meet him as he comes to throw combos, good head movement.
Canelo Alvarez, once again, he's getting caught, overall being a little bit too overconfident in some of these exchanges. So he's got to be careful with that sometimes.
Canelo's so clever with a counter.
Good right hand straight through the guard by Canelo.
Such a tough task, but he's starting to get him. He's able to show his physical strength and the punching power. Good head movement.
Particularly has been mightily impressive. Here comes Jacobs, though, trying to rip it up.
Also, take a look at how defensively responsible Canelo Alvarez is even when he's up against the ropes. It is extraordinarily hard to hit Canelo Alvarez flush, at least at his absolute best. And this is when Canelo Alvarez was at his absolute best.
In front of each other. The normal process of pro boxing to slow down after round 6-7 because it's hard in front of the rope. Nothing real clean landing, but...
Yeah, the defense from Alvarez. Quite as much meat in them.
Danny Jacobs tried, but Canelo Alvarez landed all the impactful punches within that exchange.
Got the feeling Canelo's just warming into it and just... He looks so solid, Canelo.
He's almost outboxing the master boxer here.
And I'm not sure if they're saying that Canelo Alvarez is outboxing the master boxer here. Well, Danny Jacobs isn't really a master boxer. He's someone that's a very good boxer, but he's not someone that has the level of boxing IQ as what you would need to outbox someone like a Canelo Alvarez. It's very hard to outbox someone like a Canelo Alvarez because you have to have an extraordinary level of boxing IQ and skill. Someone like a Mayweather, or you have to be not only someone that's extraordinarily skilled and intelligent for boxing, but possibly a little bit bigger, like that of a Bivol. There's a reason why certain fighters, even with great IQ or great ability, like Plant and Jacobs and Golovkin, were not able to completely or beat Canelo Alvarez. Now, I did think that Golovkin beat Canelo in the first fight, but it was very close. And, of course, Canelo, I thought that he won the second fight. But anyway.
Daniel Jacobs said he has the intel backhand and left through the middle of Alvarez. He's always had a fight. Jacobs for a couple of good body shots. Didn't seem to have any effect. And Back Alvarez
Sides of
comes.
the heads and popping shots. It's all coming from Canelo.
I have to disagree with that.
Pockets of fire that we hope for.
Great little uppercut there by Canelo. What you notice right afterwards is that he puts his lead hand right in Danny Jacobs' face to control his momentum and to control his facial and his body positioning so he can quickly land another punch.
And Alvarez now with a combination. And a
Speedy
really
combination to have any kind of success because the defense and head movement of Canelo.
edging towards the championship rounds. Coming off those 3 victories over Luis Arias, Maciej Zalewski, Sergei.
Solid. The jab's sharp when he throws it. Jacob.
What I will say about Canelo is this. Although I think that Canelo's offense mainly looks great here, he does have to watch out sometimes with leading too much of a hook. Like sometimes you'll find that Canelo Alvarez that he'll lead with a left hook or a right hook all of a sudden out of nowhere. And because he's so powerful and so crisp, a lot of the times he can get away with it. But Canelo's got to be very careful because oftentimes you're not just supposed to lead with a hook out of nowhere. He's got to be very careful.
Just seems to
win the day here in the battle, standing firm. And the right to the body as well, attempting to. A lot of Brits have travelled over just to be here. It's a
Good little exchange by Canelo Alvarez. Good tying up, but then quickly creating space and timing when Danny Jacobs is about to leave the port of the exchange, and then landing some good body work.
encounter, but Canelo at the highest echelons of world boxing.
The one shot he's been landing a lot that's very underrated is the straight right answer.
Once again, take a look at how hard it is to land on Canelo Alvarez. And it doesn't matter what range, whether he's up against the ropes, whether he's inside the range, inside the clinch, or whether he's within the mid-range. Canelo's an extremely hard dude to hit. Like certain people overall, they tell you all this bullshit about how Canelo Alvarez has no defense. Those guys have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
He's taking a lot out.
It's just so good.
Trying to apply the pressure, good
Well,
counter.
Jacobs just getting a bit sloppy there as he stood in front of Canelo. You can't stand there and be ponderous.
Good right hand over the top by Canelo.
That's a problem.
Partially blocked by Jacobs, I believe, or didn't land completely flush, but, got through to a certain degree. Danny Jacobs is a guy to where he's having very little answers on how to actually counter Canelo Alvarez at this point. So he's trying to throw a lot of, exchanges and, throw certain combinations just pretty much randomly, but when fighters end up doing that and they're not really trying to set up traps anymore, it's because they know that their opponent is so hard to hit that they pretty much have no other choice.
For him.
Whipping in the left hook to the body. That's Jared Fletcher in New York many years ago. Alvarez again with a body.
Yeah, the experience when you go through the names, Canelo, with 1 punch. And that's a problem for him. So what he needs to do is...
Really any evidence?
Yeah, he's getting backed up and pushed around now by Canelo as he lands.
And Danny Jacobs actually isn't using lateral foot movement very bad or lateral movement very bad. He's using it relatively well. But this is when Canelo Alvarez started to really develop his skill set a little bit more and become sharper and fresher as a fighter and really developed his skill set to a certain degree. This is when Canelo Alvarez was really at the peak of his career. So certain people may say, well, what about the Lara fight? You should show that fight. Well, that was kind of a Canelo Alvarez that set up things a little bit different. I mean, he still had a lot of the same attacks within that fight, but his feet were, even slower in that fight and more flat-footed within that fight. And Canelo Alvarez, although he was still very talented, he didn't have the same smartness and nor did he have the same level of IQ within that fight. And you can take a look at that fight, and I'll probably compare it one day, and you can see because Canelo kind of within that fight, although he kind of had to with Lara, because there was no way that he was going to beat someone as quick-footed as Lara at that time and someone that had a 5-inch reach advantage over him, completely boxing Lara within the mid-range. So Lara, even though, of course, he's an excellent boxer, Canelo Alvarez pretty much didn't really have any other choice but to really pressure Lara and do body work within that fight. Not only because at the point in time of that career of what Canelo Alvarez was in, but even for the expert mid-range boxer that Canelo Alvarez is, even at his absolute peak, I'm not really quite sure if you really want to stay in the mid-range with someone like Lara, especially if he has a reach advantage over you. Lara is exceptionally defensively responsible. He gets quickly inside and outside of the range, and on top of that, he's a guy that really knows how to use his feet. I would have loved to have seen a fight between Mayweather and Lara to see how Mayweather would have handled him. It would have been interesting because I don't think that Mayweather would have been able to fight with Lara on the inside range the whole time. I think he would have had to have tried to really break him down.
All the odds in this arena, and there's a lot of fans for Canelo. Big
Good right hand there by Danny Jacobs. Canelo Alvarez caught a little bit lazy there, but he did relatively slip with the punch.
Now we're both fighters, you can see they're holding their feet, they're slowing down in terms of movement and get back behind his jab and not moving straight lines. Canelo is going to be in front of him all night.
Once again, tries to keep his right hand down there so he can land another punch while keeping Danny Jacobs' head down there within the range.
Trying to let his fist fly now.
This is good from Jacobs, but Canelo back to the right.
See, Danny Jacobs is trying to throw all those little flurries because he knows that he cannot really hit Canelo Alvarez super flush.
Head movement, just slipping and sliding. A couple of shots there.
Uppercut working nicely. Back Jacobs comes with his own combinations. Jacobs, whose upper body movement is not as fluid as Alvarez. And he's shot.
And you even heard the announcer just say that the upper body movement is not as fluid from Danny Jacobs as what it is from Canelo. Like I said, the upper body movement that Canelo Alvarez has is phenomenal.
Missed with everything else. He's just brilliant from Canelo at the minute.
One man, Juan Marquez, putting his middle of the ring and engage. This is what.
And of course, they mentioned Juan Manuel Marquez, one of the biggest haters of Canelo Alvarez of all time. Just to compare those two fighters, Juan Manuel Marquez is an extraordinary level fighter. He's someone that, is a great boxer, although there were certain times where he could be a little bit flat-footed as well. He needed to be kind of taught to be a little bit more on his toes in certain fights as well. Juan Manuel Marquez was an extraordinary level counterpuncher, pretty much within all ranges. But he was a guy that, in my view, did not have the upper body movement nor the defense, nor the chin of a Canelo Alvarez. Canelo is an all-around more skilled fighter than Juan Manuel Marquez. And that is saying a lot because Juan Manuel Marquez, in my view, is one of the greatest fighters. He's around on the same level, in my view, with guys like Tommy Hearns and Miguel Cotto and Sugar Shane Mosley and Oscar De La Hoya. Those guys, I put all those guys on the same level. Juan Manuel Marquez is right there with them. But in my view, Canelo's a level above those guys.
What do you want to see?
At least he's getting some kind of success. Because at the minute,
as well as Crawford and Usyk, by the way. I have Usyk and Crawford a level above those guys as well. Any fighter that, in my view, that of this generation that was debated #1 pound for pound, or that you could have a legitimate case for once upon a time, Canelo or Crawford or Usyk, and, they're relatively successful. Now, Lomachenko, of course, he was kind of debated as the #1, but, he can't be really remembered on their level because Lomachenko, of course, once he fought Tio and Devin Haney, of course, he was not as successful. Now, I don't think that Crawford really ever fought somebody that would have outsized him by that amount, but, Crawford, in my view, there are certain things that he does in the ring that's a little bit better than Lomachenko. Lomachenko does have certain faults that you can take advantage of. So does Crawford and Canelo and maybe even Usyk to a degree, but in my view, Lomachenko's a bit more flawed even than those guys, even though he's an extraordinary level fighter.
of Canelo just looks to be dominating.
Alvarez, excellent though. And back he
Good left hook by Canelo Alvarez.
comes. And here.
Good work now, back and forth between both men. Jacobs for the first time.
Once again, just take a look at the upper body movement. But anyways, that pretty much is about it, I believe, for this video. Now, there was one major punch that Danny Jacobs ended up landing. I believe it was a right hand, but I don't want to make this video a whole lot longer. But once again, just take a look at the skill set of Canelo Alvarez and, versus that of an Errol Spence Jr. for those of us that really know the sweet science. But Canelo Alvarez is a phenomenal level boxer. He's a phenomenal level boxer, especially within the inside and the mid-range. He's a great boxer. And that's why I say, people love to say all this stuff about how Terence Crawford, about how he's way more skilled than Canelo, and that's not even close. I don't personally agree with that. I've never agreed with that. Even as skilled as what Crawford is, there are certain ranges that Canelo may be able to take advantage of, especially on the inside. Even within the mid-range, Canelo was a expert level mid-range fighter. But anyways, that pretty much is about it. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. We'll see where this goes. Thought that I would just show that because it was a video that I wanted to make for a while. But thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.